Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today I'm actually going to be doing a video more about the Blonde Ghost Network, about a facility and some employees attached to a facility known as the Naval Air Weapons Station China Lake, which was instrumental in this Blonde Ghost Network I've been talking about, in which the Blonde Ghost Network is essentially the case of Edwin Wilson, who was a rogue CIA member, later CIA contractor, um, who also worked for the Office of Naval Intelligence, who ended up selling C4 explosives to the Gaddafi regime in Libya in the late 70s, early 80s. So, a really big international scandal where you literally have a person attached to the CIA having sold C4 and other weapons like M16s and handguns and surveillance equipment to a terrorist regime. And in all the videos I've been doing so far for the people who've been watching, just to recap for the people who haven't, is that Edwin Wilson, when he was sold this C4 to Libya, his excuse when caught by authorities was that this was a CIA operation to help the agency, embed itself into the Gaddafi, system, maybe try to find some weapons of mass destruction like nuclear weapons, but also to keep track or hunt down international renowned terrorists such as Carlos the Jackal, who was allegedly in Libya at the time in like the late 70s or whatnot, right? So that's the general gist of the Edwin Wilson case, which I call the Blancos Network, and I call it the Blancos Network because the actual CIA contact with Edwin Wilson was a person named Ted Shackley, who I want to say was like assistant director or associate director of like kind of your covert operations. The actual title, exact title off the top of my head, I don't remember. I have it written down somewhere, but he was a high player in the CIA. Essentially spy works, sabotage type stuff. That was his forte. Um, so I called the Blongos Network because Ted Shackley, that was his nickname. And Ted Shackley and Edwin Wilson and other people like Thomas Kleins, Rafael Quintero, a Cuban American national. These guys are actually veterans of the Bay of Pigs era, right? So what I'm talking about in the Blonde Ghost Network actually even touches upon earlier CIA intrigues, such as the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, etc. Right? But regardless, to the point of this video is going to be about employees who helped and assisted Edwin Wilson in helping to arm Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. And it happened at a facility called uh, Naval Air Weapons Station China Lake, or Naval Air Facility China Lake, right? So before I get going, I'm going to play a snippet of the documentary Frank Turple Confessions of a Dangerous Man. Really good documentary. I highly recommend you check it out. But let me play a snippet of Frank Turple, who was Edwin Wilson's main accomplice in making these illegal arms shipments happen.
We questioned Turple for hours about Libya, until we were almost certain that the so-called mastermind of international terrorism was in fact ignorant of the full implications of the role he had been permitted to play.
Why are there supposedly in the neighborhood of 42 unindicted co-conspirators? Why did these things in China Lake, which is a very secret facility, why did these people leave our employee in Libya, which we are not denying that they work for us in Libya? They left our employee in Libya, went back to China Lake, which is a very, very clandestine secret operation, clandestine operation. And these people went back to work there. The other ones we had, which were CIA employees, or we had people besides the CIA employees, we had active duty special forces people, which were on 30 days leave to work for us in another location.
In Washington, we approached the CIA, the FBI, and the Justice Department for some comment on Turpel's activities, but this was consistently refused. But the implications of the Libyan operation extend far beyond Washington.
Okay, so I just wanted to play that snippet about that's Frank Turpel um, talking about China Lake, right? So the scene that you saw is actually the interviewer is interviewing Frank Turpel. I want to believe in Lebanon, maybe Libya. I can't remember. I think it was Lebanon, but he was actually living in hiding from the United States authorities because he skipped bail on illegal weapon sales charges. He skipped bail and fled abroad, right? Um, but it's just interesting. I just wanted to show you that snippet of him talking about China Lake, right? Because I'm sorry, Frank Turpel was living on the run basically. Same was Edwin Wilson before he got arrested in 1980, having been lured back to the United States by a government informant named Ernest Kaiser. But the thing is that a lot of other people involved in the network were actually um, considered, I think, unindicted co-conspirators in the trials. So they were basically just like witnesses, who were pretty much guilty of assisting and abetting and aiding these people. But because they have so much information to help paint a larger story, which is very confusing and a lot of different characters and players, that Frank Turpel, to his comment, he was kind of saying like, why are all these other people who helped out, not getting in trouble? Like, why is it only me on the run? Um, it's very interesting here because how did all this come to be? Like I said this in other videos before, is that somewhere in 1976, 1977, I want to say, Edwin Wilson approaches um, no, so Edwin Wilson approaches Ted Shackley at his house. Ted Shackley is still a full-time active member employee of the CIA. Wilson, however, had left the CIA, joined the Office of Naval Intelligence, and I want to say later just kind of went into his own private business in which he was running an array of shell companies that the agency would use for its various operations or whatnot. But earlier, Wilson met Turpel at a party, and Turpel had some contacts in Libya via his connections in London. So Turpel turned on Wilson to this idea that Libya was a good place to sell weapons to. So at a house meeting that featured Edwin Wilson, Kevin Mulcahy, who was kind of like another underling and kind of patsy in this whole thing. A person named Harry Rastatter, who I did a video on, who was kind of like a scout for possible opportunities for the agency, etc. They have this meeting at Shackley's house, and basically Wilson pitches this idea that he can kind of get in with the Libyans by selling them weapons and stuff like that, right? However, it's kind of fuzzy that Shackley, being an actual CIA member, allegedly told them to go into the front door of the CIA. In other words, go through the communications office, go ask some people, and see if we can kind of get the ball rolling on this, right? So Shackley was kind of protecting himself, right? Um, some other people might doubt that claim, though, in are alleging that Shackley actually knew all along what Wilson was going to do with or without agency permission. But anyways, Shackley, when questioned about all of this later on, after it unraveled, he was saying that the purpose of this meeting was to help capture Carlos the Jackal, the the renowned terrorist who was living in Libya, right? So, in other words, if caught, Shackley wanted kind of like a decent excuse about why he was kind of somewhat involved in this Libyan arms dealing plot, right? So that's kind of a little background behind how all this Libya stuff kind of began to happen, right? And so Frank Turple and Wilson, Kevin Mulcahy, and a bunch of other people like Wallace Clink, Reginald Slocum, some other people I've talked about, they helped essentially smuggle arms to Libyans, sometimes handguns, in which those handguns were actually used by the Libyans to actually carry out political assassinations of Gaddafi opponents. But they also helped to smuggle in M16 rifles, which incriminated Paul Sear, a decorated World War II OSS Jedburgh veteran, whom I made 2 videos about. And also, they stole and sent to the Libyans secret surveillance equipment, which was largely being taken from the China Lake Naval Facility, which is the purpose of this video. So a lot of deep connections and stuff like that, right? But to get to China Lake, right? So let's kind of just get into the stuff here, right? So we talked about that. So what is Naval Air Weapons Station China Lake? So Naval Air Weapons Station China Lake is a large military installation in California that supports research, testing, and evaluation programs of the United States Navy. It is part of the Navy Region Southwest under Commander Navy Installations Command. It was originally known as Naval Ordnance Test Stations (NOTS). So the installation is located in the western Mojave Desert region of California, approximately 150 miles north of Los Angeles, occupying land in 3 counties: Kern, San Bernardino, Inyo. The installation's closest neighbors are the city of Ridgecrest and the communities of Inyo, Kern, Trona, and Darwin. China Lake is the U.S. Navy's largest single land holding, representing 85% of the Navy's land for weapons and armaments research, development, acquisitions, testing, and evaluation (RDAT&E) use, and 38% of the Navy's land holdings worldwide. In total, its 2 ranges and main site cover more than 1.1 million acres, an area larger than the state of Rhode Island. As of 2010, at least 95% of the land is undeveloped. The roughly 3 billion infrastructure of the installation consists of 2,132 buildings and facilities, 329 miles of paved roads, and 1,801 miles of unpaved roads. So, jointly controlled by Naval Air Weapons Station China Lake, Edwards Air Force Base, and Fort Irwin. This space is known as the R2501 Special Use Air Complex. So interesting. So the 19,600 square miles of restricted and controlled space at China Lake makes up 12% of California's total airspace. Wow. All right. So it looks like the Army has, the Army, Air Force. So it's like, so in other words, there's a lot of this area in the desert is jointly controlled by the Air Force, Army, and Navy. But the Navy section is this China Lake facility or whatnot. But the collective name for the area is R2501 Special Use Air Complex or whatnot. In other words, is where we test bombs. So a 7.1 magnitude earthquake on July 5th, 2019, whose epicenter was between the boundaries of China Lake, resulted in the facility being temporarily evaluated as not mission capable due to damage. Jeez. So the 620 active duty military, 4,166 civilian employees, and 1,734 contractors that make up China Lake's workforce are employed across multiple tenant commands, including Naval Air Warfare Center Weapons Division, Air Test Evaluation Squadron 9, Air Test and Evaluation Squadron 31, Marine Aviation Detachment, Explosive Ordnance Disposal, Mobile Unit 3 Detachment, Explosive Ordnance Disposal Testing and Evaluation Unit 1, Naval Facilities Engineering Command Southwest Detachment, Naval Construction Center Point Huname, i.e., that's where the CVs, like the naval engineers, are at. So China Lake is a dry lake, yada yada. So the history. So amid World War II, adequate facilities were needed by the California Institute of Technology for test and evaluation of rockets. At the same time, the Navy needed a new proving ground for aviation ordnance. Caltech's Charles C. Lauriston, let's see here, and then U.S. Navy Commander Sherman E. Burroughs worked together to find a site that would meet both of their needs. Um, in the early 1930s, an emergency landing field had been built by the Workers' Progress Administration in the Mojave Desert near the small town of Inyokern, California. Opened in 1935, the field was acquired by the U.S. Army Air Force in 1942. In November 1943, it was transferred to the Navy, which established China Lake as the Naval Ordnance Test Station. So the Knots mission was defined in a letter by the Secretary of Navy as, quote unquote, a station having for its primary function the research, development, and testing of weapons, and having an additional function of furnishing primary training in the use of such weapons. Testing began within a month of the station's formal establishment. The vast and sparsely populated desert, with near perfect flying weather and practically unlimited visibility, proved an ideal location for test and evaluation activities in a complete research and development establishment. Interesting, Manhattan Project funding was used to construct a new airfield at Knott's with 3 runways, 10,000 feet, 9,000 feet, yada yada, to accommodate Boeing B-29 Super Fortress bombers. So that's interesting. So we'll skip down here. Work done by Caltech at Knott's for the Manhattan Project, particularly the testing of bomb shapes dropped from B-29s, was included as part of code name Project Camel. Interesting. Project Camel encompassed the work performed by the California Institute of Technology in support of the Manhattan Project in World War II. These activities included the development of detonators and other equipment, testing of bomb shapes dropped from Boeing B-29s. Interesting. So in 1950, Knot scientists and engineers developed the Air Intercept Missile AIM-9 Sidewinder, which became the world's most used and most copied air-to-air missile. That's a picture of it right there, the AIM-9 Sidewinder. Other rockets and missiles developed or tested at China Lake include the Mighty Mouse, Zuni, Shrike, Harm, Joint Standoff Weapon, JSOW, and Joint Direct Attack Munition, JDAM. So, Mighty Mouse, Zuni, the AGM-45 Shrike, the Harm, and some other type of. So basically, a lot of like your air-to-air, your missiles, basically. So a really important missile testing facility. So let me scroll down here. So in 1963, President John F. Kennedy visited China Lake for an air show and to see the Michelson Lab. So in 1969, Knott's China Lake and the Naval Ordnance Laboratory in Corona, California, became the Naval Weapons Center. Interesting. So that was actually out in so that was actually out in Corona, California, Riverside County. But the Naval Ordnance Laboratory was a facility in White Oak area of Montgomery, Maryland. The location is now used as the headquarters for the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Interesting. So there was like a merger of certain things, and it became the Naval Air Weapons Station. So in January 1992, the Naval Weapons Center and Pacific Missile Test Center, Point Mugu, were established and joined with naval units at Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque and at White Sands Missile Range at White Sands, New Mexico, as a single command. Um, the Naval Air Warfare Center Weapons Division of the Naval Air Systems Command, NAVAIR. Um, so at the same time, the physical plant at China Lake was designated as a Naval Air Weapons Station and became the host of the NAV Air Weapons Division, performing the base keeping functions. So in 1982, the community area of China Lake, including most of the base housing, was annexed by the city of Ridgecrest. In 2013, Congress reserved China Lake's acreage for an additional 25 years of use additional 25 years for military use. So that's very interesting. So the city of Ridgecrest annexed most of the base housing. That's very interesting. It seems like a very interesting place. Like, so are you saying that it's so remote that even though you're on base, it's kind of partially managed by the city of Ridgecrest? I don't know. It just seems kind of interesting, like this relationship, unless, or rather, the China Lake facility was used to have base housing. They kind of just privatized it basically, and is just essentially just you don't live on base. You live in the city of Ridgecrest, even though technically in the past you would have been on base in your former base house, something of that nature. So in 2014, U.S. Representative Kevin McCarthy of California, and you see here, I think is that the Kevin McCarthy? Yep, that's the former Speaker of the House of California, introduced a bill to permanently designate Naval Air Weapons Facility China Lake property for military use, arguing it would save taxpayer money and enhance the base's mission. So permanently designate China Lake property for military use. Okay. So the bill would add 25,000 acres, including about 7,500 acres that were part of a bombing range in San Bernardino County, as well as 19,000 acres along the station's southwest boundaries. The Bureau of Land Management said that the DoD could change in the future decades. The Bureau of Land Management said that DoD needs could change in future decades, and that it is a popular recreation area with trail riding, campsites, and hunting in an important wildlife corridor, especially for the threatened desert tortoise. So like I said, I can read all this, right? So it's very interesting. So a lot of different weapons have been tested at this facility, right? Um, so with that being said, let me read some of the notes I took about the China Lake people involved in this Blonde Ghost network, right? All right, pause real quick. All right, so let me read this, right? So these are some notes I took. So Blonde Ghost Network bios, China Lake employees, R. Swallow, D. Wilson, D. Hayden, J. Nichols, or Nicholas, I think that's supposed to be. Let me see here. Yep, that's supposed to be Nicholas. And R. Calvani and the Bryant brothers, right? So very interesting. So Robert E. Swallow and Dennis J. Wilson were two seasoned demolition experts working at the China Lake Naval Weapons Facility near the Mojave Desert in California. They were recruited by Wilson and Turkle to go to Libya while still having top secret security clearances to train Gaddafi's regime. They used business cover with their story being that they were opening and managing an explosive sales and demolition consulting office in Libya for the J.S. Brower and Associates Inc. Both men took leave from their China Lake jobs but did not tell their employer of the nature of their trip or work. Both men also had ties to the top secret Vietnam program Project 308. Robert Swallow is noted as having patented at least three inventions which are now held by the U.S. Navy, such as for impact fuses, i.e., fuses actuated by only by ammunition impact with firing pin structurally combined with fuse operating by inertia or other members I don't know, by inertia of members on impact. He also helped patent a frictionless relief valve, and he also helped to patent a sequencing switch. So I'm going to show you pictures of those. So other employees of China Lake include Douglas H. Hayden, a computer scientist who said in a telephone interview today, I copied this from some of the notes, some of the articles I was reading, in an interview today that he had met Tafoya, Mr. Tafoya, in other words, Eugene Tafoya. So if you don't know who that is, based on my other videos, Eugene Tafoya was an ex-Green Beret recruited by Edwin Wilson and Frank Turple via a CIA member named Patrick Loomis to go to Libya to help train Gaddafi's forces. So there's a direct link between the Green Berets and this China Lake facility through this computer scientist named Douglas H. Hayden. So, so this Hayden guy said that he met Tafoya in 1978 while dating his half sister. This thus links Hayden to Tafoya and thus to Loomis and thus to Wilson Turple. So James S. Nichols and Ralph E. Calvani were arrested for stealing 10 Starlight night scopes, a low light television camera, and a small remote control helicopter from the center, in which they believed the goods were being sent to Libya in a sanctioned CIA operation to swap for secretive Russian radar systems. So that's the thing, right? So in this whole confusing network of the Blongos network that I was talking about, is that nobody really knew the story. And the mastermind in the middle was Ed Wilson. He was kind of always compartmentalizing, triangulating, leading everybody off the trail, even the people he needed and relied on. So, for example, he told Kevin P. Mulcahy, who was his kind of patsy underling office manager at Inter Technologies Inc., one of Wilson's many shell companies who did like arms dealing, some legal, often illegal, I guess. Um, he told Mulcahy that, for example, this Libyan operation had CIA approval and was about helping to clear mines from like the Arab-Israeli war or something like that. So a lot of people believe that story, but then also it looks like a lot of the people who are stealing goods for Wilson and Turple believe that the stolen goods were going to be used in a Soviet weapons exchange, essentially, some sort of exchange in order to understand more of the Soviet radar system. So, in other words, the Libyans allegedly had some sort of advanced Soviet radar technology, but they were only going to give it up if they got their hands on American munitions. So, some people believe that story, but the CIA is saying that none of that's actually true, and Wilson made all this up just to enrich himself. So, it's very interesting. It's like a lot of different stories, right? And then also, of course, um, the excuse that Wilson used for himself was that he was basically working for the CIA to get in bed with the Libyans to hopefully find some weapons of mass destruction, but also hunt down Carlos the Jackal. And the CIA, with people like Ted Shackley, that was also their cover story. So you have these three conflicting stories: one about like mine ordnance clearing from the Arab-Israeli war, another one about trying to swap American goods with the Libyans for advanced Soviet radar equipment, and then another is about just trying to infiltrate the Libyan state effectively and spy on them, understand if they're trying to create nukes, and also keeping tabs on the terrorists who are being trained by Gaddafi. like Carlos the Jackal, the IRA, Palestinian Liberation Organization, et cetera, et cetera, right? So a lot of different stories in this kind of maze that is the Blonde Ghost Network, right? And there were also the Bryant brothers who were involved in theft, right? So so that's the thing, right? So for example, so we know that Edwin Wilson was sold C4 to Libya, right? But in order to use the C4, you need detonators, right? So Wilson and Turple knew a guy named I think John Harper, who worked for a company, AEI. I think it's like American Electronics Inc., which was like kind of a CIA contractor in the Virginia area. They relied on him to make detonators, but he couldn't make enough detonators, and some of the detonators didn't work in their prototype demonstration to the Libyans, I believe. So the Libyans, despite this demonstration of failed detonators happening, actually placed an order for like an insane amount of detonators, like something like 300,000 or 500,000 detonators. So because this John Harper guy at American Electronics couldn't fulfill the order, he was still involved in giving consultations. They bring in another company, a CIA contractor named SCI, Scientific Communications Inc., based in, I want to say, Dallas, Texas, or the Dallas Fort Worth area, right? I think they were listed in Garland, Texas. But regardless, the president of that company basically agreed to help fulfill the order. He even hand delivered some of the detonators himself at a hotel room exchange for this whole illegal exchange with the Libyans, right? So so there's that, right? However, Wilson wanted more technical expertise in order to prove to the Libyans that they could actually make special type of detonators for what bombs, but also special type of bombs. I'm talking about bombs hidden in lamps and ashtrays and all sorts of stuff, right? Like true assassination sort of equipment, right? Like stuff that we don't want our enemies to know that we're capable of. Edwin Wilson was essentially selling this to the Libyans, right? But in order to get that true technical expertise, they reached back to China Lake Weapons Facility. And China Lake's weapon facility has a special relationship with the CIA because the CIA actually uses that facility to test its own munitions and explosives and ordnance, right? So that's where Robert Swallow and I want to say Dennis Wilson, I think that's his name. Let me go. Here's my notes. I'll pull up here in a minute. Come into play, right? So that's where those guys come into play. So let me go here. So this is from a New York Times source. Arms exporter is believed linked with attempt to murder Libyan by I think Philip Taubman, 1981, in the New York Times. So Dennis Wilson is his name. Yep. So quote unquote. So two former civilian employees, Robert E. Swallow and Dennis J. Wilson, the latter no relation to Edwin P. Wilson, took unpaid leaves from the center in late 1976 and early 1977 to go to Libya, where they worked in terrorist training camp organized by Edwin Wilson and Mr. Turple, according to federal prosecutors. They are under investigation but have not been charged with any crime. No United States law prohibits Americans from training terrorists abroad. Interesting. So this is another thing. So this is a quote about Douglas Hayden, the computer scientist guy who links to Eugene Tafoya, the special forces guy. So the Weapons Center employee Douglas H. Hayden, a computer scientist, said in a telephone interview today that he had met Mr. Eugene Tafoya in 1978 while dating his half-sister. Mr. Hayden denied any involvement in or knowledge of the October 1980 attack on Mr. Zaglai, who was studying at Colorado State University. Mr. Hayden, who said his relationship with Mr. Tafoya was purely social and had never involved discussions about Libya, said he had not been called by any federal investigators. So, a little background if you didn't watch the video about Eugene Tafoya. Eugene Tafoya was kind of just like grizzled uh, Vietnam veteran. I believe he also fought in like Korea, maybe even World War II. Um, who just didn't really have a good sense of purpose in like the mid 70s. And I think the Patrick Loomis, who was the scout of the Green Berets, the Special Forces for Wilson, kind of I think fed off of that insecurity and that lostness with a lot of these veterans. And working through the Special Forces Alumni Association, which was I think then led by a guy named James Jimmy Dean. They basically found a lot of just Green Beret veterans who just needed purpose, right? And they were probably told fraudulently that they were working for a legitimate CIA operation, and they went to Libya and were putting in work. And Eugene Tafoya was also the muscle for Edwin Wilson in many ways, going so far as um, patting down Thomas Klein's to get back a $500,000 bridge loan that Wilson made to help set up another shell company that Wilson wanted back. But Eugene Tafoya became infamous because in the 1980s, he drove to Fort Collins, Colorado, and found two dissident Libyan students who Gaddafi wanted dead, and Wilson put in a hit on them and paid Tafoya to do the job. But Tafoya botched the job despite shooting the guy twice in the head, I believe. The guy survives, and then Eugene Tafoya was later arrested, and more of the Blonde network started to unravel and everything. So pretty insane stuff where you have Green Berets working for this Wilson guy, allegedly with CIA approval, allegedly not with CIA approval, essentially helping the Gaddafi regime take out their opponents. That's pretty wild stuff. Okay, so regardless, let me skip down. So, as you can tell, these are just kind of random quick notes. Nicholas and Calvani. So, this is going to be about Nicholas and Calvani. So, the other two individuals, also former civilian employees at the center, are James S. Nichols. Did I get that right? Yeah, I guess Nichols. Yeah, I guess it's Nichols, and Ralph E. Calvani. They were indicted along with three other men in March on charges related to the theft of 10 Starlight night scopes, a low light television camera, and a small remote control helicopter from the center. When first questioned by federal prosecutors, Mr. Nichols, so let me see here, Mr. Nichols, cross this out. What did he say? Said that the equipment had been removed as part of a plot sanctioned by the CIA to exchange American weapons in Libya for a piece of sophisticated Soviet radar equipment. The intelligence agency has denied any involvement in this. And this source is from the UPI, dated 21 June 1981, titled Report Links to Ex-CIA Agents to Thefts of Military Radar, and it can be found in the CIA reading room. So back to Robert Swallow and Dennis Wilson, right? These two ordnance experts. So this is based off of a New York Times article exposing the Libyan link. So Wilson's contacts with Jerome S. Brower, a California explosive manufacturer, intensified during the period, and Brower, who had supplied the first shipment of explosives to Libya in the summer of 1976, began recruiting bomb experts for the Wilson operations. Federal authorities learned that the two of the experts recruited by Brower, Robert E. Swallow and Dennis J. Wilson, no relation to Ed Wilson, were civilian Navy employees at the China Lake Naval Weapons Center in the Mojave Desert in California, where some of the Navy's and CIA's most sensitive ordnance research is conducted. Swallow and Dennis Wilson, federal authorities say, spent their annual leave in 1977 on site at Ed Wilson's training camp in Tripoli. Both men returned to their government jobs without informing anyone about what was going on in Libya. The men are now under investigation by the United States Attorney's Office. So some more quotes about Robert Swallow and Dennis Wilson. Back to Paul Tubman article, Worry Over Illegal Arms Exports Growing Among U.S. Prosecutors by the New York Times. So the case connected to Edwin C. Wilson and Mr. Turple involves the terrorist training activities of two former Weapons Center civilian employees, Robert E. Swallow and Dennis J. Wilson. The latter no relation to Edwin C. Wilson. Mr. Swallow and Wilson. Sorry, read that one there for you. Here we go. So let me skip down a little bit. Defense Department officials familiar with the case said that in his application for a leave, Mr. Swallow stated, I have an opportunity to assist in opening and managing an explosive sales and demolition consulting office in Libya for the J.S. Brower and Associates, Inc. of Pomona, California. So though neither Mr. Swallow nor Dennis Wilson was working on particularly sensitive projects when they went to Libya, Defense Department officials said the two men had worked in the 1960s on Project 308, a highly classified effort by the CIA and Defense Department to develop weapons for special warfare in Vietnam. So Dennis Wilson resigned from the center in September 1978. Mr. Swallow went on sick leave in December 1980 and has not returned to work. Reached by telephone, Mr. Wilson declined to comment. Mr. Swallow was said by someone who answered the phone at his home to be on vacation and unavailable for comment. Federal investigators are also exploring possible connections between Mr. Swallow and Dennis Wilson and the other China Lake case, the 1979 loss of equipment. So there's that, right? So another person who wasn't involved in the theft or anything like that, but his name is Captain J.W. Patterson, who was the chief of staff officer at China Lake, who knew nothing of Robert Swallow's or Dennis Wilson's trip to Libya. He claimed if he knew the reason of the trip, then their leave would not have been granted. So he claimed if he knew the reason for the trip, then their leave would have been granted. Actually, let me see something here. That's kind of strange. I think maybe I copied that wrong. He said he claimed if he knew the reason for the trip, then their leave would have been granted. So that almost implicates in there. So let me go here real quick. So what is that? Worry over that. Here we go. So this is the article. Okay, so let me blow this up for you. So Navy officials at the center said that they did not learn about the true purpose of the leaves until they read newspaper reports late in 1980. And Captain J.W. Patterson, the chief staff officer at the center, said that had officials known the nature of their plans, the leaves would not have been granted. So there you go. So not have been granted. So go back here. All right. And like I said, making some ad hoc notes. All right, so there's that. And then there's also some other characters named Larry Bryant, who was a China Lake employee who stole equipment. As you can see, like I said, these are really like my working notes. Who stole equipment for Turple and Wilson, a retired Air Force electronics expert. The Federal Bureau of Investigation traced some of the night scopes used to aim weapons at night through infrared detection to Las Vegas, where agents observed them being transported by Larry Bryant in a car. In an interview in Las Vegas, Larry Bryant said that he did not know that the cartons he was transporting contained night scopes. Mr. Bryant said that while stationed at Nellis Air Force Base near Las Vegas, he had made occasional trips to China Lake to assist in research projects. January 4th, 1980, he and Bradley were arrested in Philadelphia hotel. Larry Bryant was not charged in Lexington, in which Bradley had rented a storage unit tied to contraband. And this is in a New York Times article. So he has a relative named Bradley Bryant. Bradley Bryant was also a China Lake employee, or at least familiar with it, because of his cousin Larry, who also trafficked equipment for Turple and Wilson. He and Larry were arrested in Philadelphia, which led to the search of a warehouse in Lexington rented by Bradley Bryant, where police found a large arsenal of weapons valued at more than $250,000, various electronic surveillance devices, and infrared night scope. Federal authorities believe that the night scopes found in Lexington was one of the 10 from China Lake. So Bradley was acquitted there in May 1980 on a charge of illegal possession of firearms, but he was arrested in Illinois and charged with unlawful delivery of 804 pounds of marijuana to federal undercover prosecutors. And this is in the same article by Philip Topman, published 14 July 1981, titled Worry Over Illegal Arms Exports Growing Among U.S. Prosecutors by the New York Times. So that's really, so basically you had the Bryant brothers, right? And you have the captain who wasn't really involved, but then you have the two genius expert ordnance people who were kind of, so now that we know that they were recruited by Brower. So this is the thing, right? And I took these notes earlier this morning to kind of understand how the shipment of C4 happened. I was going to do a separate video just about the logistics in and of itself, but I'll make this quick. So they did a first shipment in late 1976 where they kind of sent like a small batch of C4 to Libya. So Brower was contacted by Mulcahy and Turple, and I want to say he was fronted about $38,000 in 1976 money, and they smuggled C4 in 55-gallon containers, and they flew them from Los Angeles to Dulles, and then into Germany, and then to Tripoli. I believe, unbeknownst to Lufthansa, the German airlines staff. But then in 1977, a second shipment, a larger shipment of 42,200 pounds of C4 RDX, whose I want to say the name of it is like cyclotrimethylene trinitramine. They sent 42,000 pounds of C4 to Libya by way of Houston via a plane chartered out of Miami, and they flew it into Lisbon, and then Lisbon, I want to say maybe into Germany or directly into Libya. So insane, right? So there's that. So anyways, so we got these guys here. So yeah, so it's just very interesting, right? And I want to say that the guys, I want to say that Larry Bryant, right, when he was in Las Vegas, I think he was already being investigated by the ATF. And the ATF agents who were kind of on the scent of these Bryant brothers who were working with China Lake, I want to say if I got to go back to my notes, but they may have been the agents who actually believed Kevin Mulcahy's whistleblower story, which kind of started the downfall of the network in and of itself. So you kind of have these kind of like two gruff 1970s, Starsky and Hutch type guys with the ATF, keeping tabs on these missing weapons and stuff like that. And then they kind of threw from Las Vegas to Philly and Philly to Lexington. They kind of realized some of the night scopes that were allegedly sent to Libya are involved with these guys or something like that, right? So, and then Mulcahy, who later became a whistleblower, running for his life, afraid that Wilson was going to kill him and everything like that, ends up finding solace in the ATF agents who build the case because the FBI was kind of dragging their heels, the DOJ was dragging their heels, the CIA wasn't being cooperative, and it was really the ATF agents in a police force capacity and federal prosecutors, Larry Barcella and Carol Bruce, who kind of really helped to take down and build the case against Turple and Wilson. So interesting little background story there. It's kind of funny, man. Like I kind of stumbled into this, and like just how intimate you kind of become with like the notes. It's kind of like cool. I don't know, kind of funny. I mean, or nerdy, not either or. However you want to interpret it, right? So there's that, and let me go over here. And I think we're Good on volume. Okay. All right. So what's interesting is when I did some more digging on, so this is like kind of the official website of China Lake. It still exists to this day. So it's a Navy facility and everything like that. If I was serving in the military, I grew up in the military, so it has like a base exchange, like a shop and all that type of stuff, right? They also interesting. There's actually a China Lake Museum, so they have a museum commemorating the work that was done. And put it this way: whether you're anti-war, pro-war, or whatever, this is a part of history. You know what I'm saying? And even though these are weapons of war or whatnot, you got to think all the science, all the engineering, all the teams, all the logistics that goes into making these munitions, right? So it seems a little weird to have a museum dedicated towards weapons, but then again, it's kind of not because it preserves, the history, the legacy, right? So the China Lake Museum in Ridgecrest, California is really out there too. So the museum originated with a single room at the Weapons Exhibit Center in 1955. The collection was expanded in 1963, but began to deteriorate 10 years later due to the expansion of a lab. A man named Will Milt Burford began efforts to expand the collection again in 1989, and 4 years after that, the China Lake Museum Foundation was established. The organization was officially recognized as the U.S. Naval Museum of Armaments and Technology in May 2000. However, in the fall of 2011, the museum announced it would no longer be a part of the Navy Museum system and would change its name to the China Lake Museum. So let me see here. So the Navy History and Heritage Command, or formerly the Naval Historical Center, is an Echelon 2 command responsible for preservation, analysis, and dissemination of U.S. naval history. Okay, so it's kind of like it seems like more of a private nonprofit sort of thing right now. Um, Probably relies on like donations and stuff. So, or grants. So, plans to move the museum to the adjoining city of Ridgecrest to improve public access were announced in April 2017. The first phase involved the construction of a parking lot and 2,880 square feet modular building. 5 years later, the museum revealed it had received approval for a second phase with a 7,200 square foot building. So, they're growing. Good for them. So, aircraft on display, McDonnell Douglas YF-18A Hornet. And it's kind of cool. I mean, military museums are really, really cool. I mean, whether you agree with the military or not, just all the history you get. Like I said, all the different munitions. Pretty fascinating stuff. And yeah, so it's interesting. So it's in Ridgecrest, California. It's maybe they probably get grants maybe from the Navy, but the Navy doesn't like truly like own it anymore, right? Excuse me. So there's that. And I also found another website, an older website that kind of links to has like a lot of the old patches and stuff like that. So I'll put this in the description for you. So it's kind of cool. This kind of just more of the history. I'm a big like military patch fan. So there's that. And then I want to say this right here actually is the actual website for the China Lake Museum. And what's interesting is if I go down here, so actually right here, so Patterson, right? So Captain John W. Patterson. So that's here, right? But he was, I guess, the commander of the overall facility. It looks like from in 1986. So this was 6 years after that article that I referenced. So it seems like Patterson was just kind of maybe like a lower level rank person associated with the facility, but by 1986 he became the commander or whatnot. That's the only way how I can kind of rationalize the date discrepancy or whatnot between these two. So it's very interesting. So they got all the commanders and stuff like that, and I think there's even a current commander right now. And it's interesting. Let me blow out of this real quick. So kind of just to give you a view of what the commander looked like, right? And it's so you can go to home. So pretty interesting stuff. So they have a gift shop and everything, but the only problem is it's in the middle of nowhere. I'm talking like it's in the middle of nowhere. Um, Maybe if you're stationed at Edwards Air Force Base or something like that, maybe it might be worth your while to make it out to Ridgecrest or something, But I would probably say you're probably going to have to do some online shopping if you're interested. So yeah, they got a little shop and everything. It's kind of cool. So admission fees, not too much. You can become a member um, if you're into this type of stuff, right? You got a shop. They got all like some interesting pictures and photos history. It was interesting. I was actually in Las Vegas and I actually went to like the National Atomic Museum that actually talks about the Manhattan Project and all that type of stuff. And you would think like it would seem like it'd be like a very weird place to go, but you'd just be surprised how fascinating it is. So like if you're ever in Las Vegas, it's off the strip and everything, but if you just have time to kill or whatever like that, just I would say check it out. It doesn't take all day to walk around, but you can really see a lot of like the history behind like the American nuclear program there. So wow, they got all sorts of cool. I mean, it's I hate saying cool, but very interesting. That's kind of interesting. So yeah, very interesting. And they have like so there's that, and then you can like shop around and stuff. Museum collection, weapons. And like I said, I'm not trying to shame the actual facility and the people who are like obeying the law or whatever. This is just to point out, these people involved with what you call it, the Belongos network is what I'm talking about. So yeah, very interesting. For some reason, this reminds me of some Jack Parsons type stuff or whatever. When he was out trying to figure out early rockets and everything and all that. A7 Corsair, such a cool plane. Right. So then there's that. And then what's interesting, right? So let me do something here real quick. All right, this is kind of just a map of the area, so it's kind of interesting. So it's like China Lake, and and this looks like they have a bowling alley. I think kind of like the front office for China Lake. They have a Embry Riddle campus for soldiers and everything, or sailors or whatnot, Marines. Hospital, the museum. They have a Navy exchange. In other words, like a little shopping mall, fire department, some subway, barefoot bar. Interesting. They actually have like a golf course up here, which is kind of interesting. Oh, so it seems pretty cool. So there's that. Let me keep going here real quick. So these are actually some of the patents I was talking about when it came to. Let me see here real quick. Let me pull it up. Okay, so peep this. So this is one of the things that. So you can see here, inventor Robert E. Swallow and Clayton E. Panalakwi. Current assignee of the patent is the U.S. Department of the Navy, right? So this is for an impact fuse, and you can kind of get a little better view of it and everything up there. So wow, it looks like some sort of firing pin detonator type device or whatnot. This is public information, by the way, so I'm not doing anything crazy. Um, wow, 1967, Robert E. Swallow, right? So in other words, like they got some people who knew what they were doing. And then this is another patent that he did. And I want to say it's kind of cool that Google allows you to see this stuff, man. That's awesome. This is what the internet's for, like just free information. It's pretty legit. So June 17, 1969. So your frictionless relief valve. So this was also by Warren P. Froebner, Rob E. Swallow, and Delbert W. Hoffman, current assignee, the U.S. Department of Navy. Wow, pretty cool. Look at them, patent stuff. All right, so, but too bad you were being bad and helping terrorists in in Libya. Not good. So, Uh, I mean, because Gaddafi, man, like, I mean, I get it that some people try to have some sympathies for Gaddafi because, like, he resisted the quote unquote world order and he was trying to get crunk up in Africa and, go to like a gold standard with African currencies and stuff like that or whatever. But at the end of the day, though, he also killed a lot of innocent people, like, straight up. So there's that. So this is actually an article from CIA Reading Room. Let me go here real quick. So two former CIA agents being sought on charges of illegal arms sales to Libya have been linked to the theft of radar equipment from naval test site in China Lake, California. The Philadelphia Bulletin reported today. The report named Frank E. Turple and Edwin P. Wilson as the subjects of a federal investigation into the theft of radar equipment from the U.S. Naval Testing Center at China Lake, a Southern California test center for sophisticated weaponry and electronic systems. Both men are being sought on federal fugitive warrants on charges they sold large quantities of weapons and sensitive military equipment to Muammar Gaddafi's government in Libya. The newspaper quoted an unnamed Justice Department source as saying Turple and Wilson allegedly stole a ton of stuff from China Lake over a period of several years. The pair allegedly used CIA contacts to obtain the radar equipment, which installed in an airplane can detect and classify approaching aircraft as friendly or enemy aircraft, according to the newspaper. Turple, who jumped bail and is believed to be out of country, was convicted in absentia last month on gun running charges in New York. Turple and Wilson have also have been accused in indictments of hiring former Green Berets to work in Libya, training members of international terrorist groups such as Italy's Red Brigade, the Palestinian Liberation Army, and the Irish Republican Army. The newspaper reported. Federal investigators are checking the possibility that the two former agents were involved with 5 other men, including 2 China Lake employees who were indicted recently on charges of stealing military night scopes, a low light detection camera, and a remote control helicopter from the Naval Center. Uh, the report said. The bulletin said federal investigators estimate that Turple and Wilson allegedly sold the Libyan government hundreds of night scopes, infrared devices used to detect targets at night. So pretty wild stuff there. So how we talked about how I want to say I think it was Swallow and Dennis Wilson worked on a project 308 or something to that effect, right? So the only thing I can kind of find online about it or about something similar to it, nothing directly, even when I go to the CIA's website in their Freedom of Information section, Project Eldest Son seems like the closest thing to what these guys were working on with Project 308. So this is wild because this is going to connect to another, figure who I talk about a lot, who was kind of involved in everything, General John K. Singlaub, whose lasting effects are affecting us today under the MAGA administration because one of his disciples in his young officer military career was General Michael Flynn, brother of Charles Flynn, one of the many officers at the Pentagon who allegedly kind of stalled the deployment of National Guard forces to suppress the J6 insurrection, right? So this stuff kind of connects adjacently to a lot of my studies into the MAGA movement and how my personal opinion is that when Donald Trump is talking about cleaning the deep state, he's actually just a continuation of what always was effectively. And it's kind of comical how the deep state has been kind of painted as this kind of like woke DEI, blue haired feminist sort of operation when really always has been a very quasi far right soldier of fortune culture, Mormon mafia, evangelical Christians, you know, horse country, horse country Virginians, who live in mansions and stuff like that, and industrialists and everything. Like it's wild to think that people think that like Antifa controls the deep state or whatnot, but unfortunately, the people who I'm talking about have way more power, money, influence, than I do. So they're able to just use, psychological warfare effectively on people to get them to believe their narratives. But regardless, this Project 308 seems to be Project Eldest Son. So it was a program of covert operations conducted by the United States Studies and Observation Group, SOG, during the Vietnam War. So SOG essentially were special forces used doing unconventional warfare, right? And they were attached to the I want to say Military Assistance Command Vietnam, which is essentially kind of like a headquarters kind of repository center between all the different branches and CIA to kind of like crunch numbers and almost you can almost think of it as like a headquarters, like a strategic headquarters, effectively. And but the Special Observation Group was the covert. Think of like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Predator, kind of like behind enemy lines, hit teams who were doing a lot of unconventional warfare. They were involved in the Phoenix programs, which were the targeted assassination killing campaigns either by the U.S. government directly or by the provincial reconnaissance units, the PRUs, which were South Vietnamese forces being trained but observed by special U.S. special forces, etc. Right? So the project focused on placement of exploding cartridges into supplies used by communist combat forces in Southeast Asia. That sounds a lot like what um, they were talking about in the documentary with what you call it with Frank Turple, right? So United States technicians assembled 11,565 7.62 by 39 millimeter cartridges for AK-47 rifles, 556 12.7 by 108 millimeter heavy machine gun cartridges, and 1,968 82 millimeter Type 67 mortar shells to detonate in the weapon when firing was attempted. Project Eldest Son is an example of unconventional warfare. The missions was under so the missions under this program were implemented successfully in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. So history: small arms ammunition sabotage had previously been employed by the United Kingdom against rebellious tribesmen in the Second Matabele War and the Waziristan campaign of 1936 to 1939. In both cases, ammunition sabotage had been effective because the tribesmen were heavily reliant on salvaged ammunition rather than industrialized supply chain of newly manufactured ammunition. General John K. Singlov, a World War II veteran of the Office of Strategic Services, suggested uh, similar methods while he commanded SOG from 1966 to 1968. So he was all about it, right? So captured ammunition was partially disassembled and reassembled with substituted components. Rifle and machine gun cartridges had the smokeless powder replaced with a high explosive of similar appearance, which would generate approximately 5 times the designated pressure of firearms. The bolt and pieces of an exploding AK-47 receiver would typically be projected backwards into the head of of the individual firing the rifle. Substitute fuses so fuses is what that Robert Swallow guy was patenting, right? Which is in military munitions, a fuse with a Z is part of the device that initiates the function. So a fuse may be identified by function as a quote unquote exploder. So substitute fuses were placed in the mortar shells to detonate the shell when the mortar fired. Explosions of the team fired machine guns and mortars often killed or injured anyone near the exploding weapon. Jeez. So a single sabotage cartridge or shell would then be placed in a magazine or case of good ammunition to avoid revealing the cause of the explosion. These sabotage ammunition containers were carried by SAW Green Beret patrols and left behind when guerrilla ammunition stashes were discovered. A few stashes were created where circumstances might be interpreted as indicating the troops transporting or storing the ammunition had been killed. Ooh, so a few stashes were created where circumstances might be interpreted as indicating the troops transporting or storing that ammunition had been killed. So goals. The goal of the project was to cause the enemy to question the safety of their ordnance. Physical damage and injuries observable by communist forces were augmented by forged documents to generate mistrust between Vietnamese troops and Chinese suppliers. One pretending to be a Viet Cong document acknowledged rumors of exploding ammunition, but betrayed them as an exaggeration of a negligibly small problem. Another acknowledged a few thousand problems resulting from poor Chinese quality control, but estimated future risk would be less. Official documents distributed to U.S. forces with assumption they would reach communist hands advised troops not to use captured AK-47s because faulty metallurgy caused them to explode when fired. 1 minute, cat's acting up a little bit. All right. So let's see here. Termination. So some details of Project Eldest Son were revealed in United States news publications in 1969 when less than half of the sabotage rounds had been placed. The project was renamed Italian Green and then Pole Bean, and an accelerated placement program was initiated to utilize as much as possible before authority for the program expired. These conditions allow communist forces to ascertain the true cause of their weapons failures, but raise doubt about the safety of their ammunition supplies in some combat areas. Hmm. And then there's an article in American Rifleman titled Wreaking Havoc One Round at a Time by John L. Plaster, published May 2008. Interesting. And then also in the book Green Berets at War by S.L. Stanton, published by Ballantine Books, 1999, on page 234. And there seems to be web archive about it. So wow, so that's what I'm assuming this Project 308 may have been, that Robert Swallow and Dennis Wilson were working on with their like fuses and their safety valves and all this type of stuff. So very interesting stuff there, right? And they even talked about John Singlob, who was wild. I mean, just another person. I just need to write notes, more notes in his file that I'm keeping. Um, but yeah, so let me do something real quick before I wrap this up. All right, so I found a video, some YouTube videos about China Lake, which I actually never seen before. So I'm gonna play those for you. So let me turn down the volume.
5-2 on the way.
The Pacific Ranges of the Naval Air Systems Command were created in the mid-1940s to provide the space necessary to safely conduct testing of modern military weapon systems. Testing is required to maintain military readiness. Before a weapon can be certified for use in combat, it must undergo extensive testing in a variety of operational environments. The purpose of this testing? To collect detailed performance data on a wide range of weapon systems, including ship-launched missiles, air-launched missiles, surface-launched missiles, free-fall ordnance, like bombs, glide weapons, and electronic warfare systems from unseen threats. Individual components are tested separately as well, like propulsion systems, warheads, fuses, and inert airframes. In fact, the majority of testing is accomplished using weapons without warheads. For example, in the Sidewinder AIM-9X developmental test series, 18 of 19 tests were conducted without warheads.
5-2.
Substitution of a transmitter in place of the warhead allowed test engineers to see through the eye of the missile. Testing modern military systems is a dangerous activity, and a tremendous amount of land, air, and sea space is required in order to conduct these tests safely and securely. The NavAir Pacific Ranges include more than 1,700 square miles of land range at China Lake, blanketed by some 20,000 square miles of restricted military airspace. And at Point Mugu, a sea range that encompasses over 36,000 square miles of ocean. It's important to note that this testing impacts a very small area within these boundaries. In fact, more than 95% of the land, sea, and airspace exists to provide a buffer for safety and security. These ranges are not only vast, but instrumented as well. In order to collect precise performance data, extensive instrumentation is used and maintained by a cadre of experienced and well-trained personnel. Since most of this range instrumentation is located in remote areas, they utilize a wide spectrum of radio frequencies that are reserved for military use. Let's examine what is involved in testing a weapon. Welcome to the China Lake Range Control Center, or RCC, where experienced personnel perform tasks including range safety, air surveillance, operational control, data processing and display, and impact area instrumentation. In this test on the land range, an FA-18 aircraft, the launch platform, is releasing a joint standoff weapon, JSOW, against a simulated military target. In order to safely control the test, it is essential to know the precise three-dimensional location of the participants at all times. This is called TSPI, for time, space, position. Accurate TSPI is obtained from a variety of ground stations, where it is received, decoded, and sent to the Range Control Center, where it is recorded. A single test may require monitoring several thousand individual parameters, ranging from aircraft speed and roll angle to the proper sequencing of weapon functions. Throughout the test, performance data is recorded for post-test analysis. High-speed cameras set up around the target area provide detailed information on warhead performance, and post-test examination of the targets yields additional information on weapon effectiveness. Testing follows a similar pattern on the sea range. In this test, for example, an
But first tonight, we are getting a better idea about how much damage last week's big earthquakes caused at the China Lake Naval Air Weapons Station just north of Ridgecrest. 17's Eitan Wallace was at a town hall meeting today and filed this report.
This is the China Lake Naval Air Weapons Station just outside the city of Ridgecrest. Home to 4,000 employees and more than 1,300 buildings, this is where the Navy tests its weapons and conducts other matters secret to the general public. But following two major earthquakes and thousands of aftershocks that rocked this area, the base sustained damage. The majority of the thousands of people who work here have not been allowed to return until further notice, and that brings us to today.
We want to get people back to work quickly.
During a town hall at Burroughs High School in Ridgecrest, the executive director of the Naval Air Warfare Center Weapons Division discussed the status of the base.
Monitors down on the floor, pictures off the walls, stuff came off desks, and it's messy. It's messy.
Messy, but even so, officials say a significant amount of the employees will be able to return to their buildings in the coming days. Still, there are some who will need to wait longer.
There are a couple facilities that are structurally not sound. They're not going to be occupied in weeks or months, but the people working there, we are going to ensure they have places to work.
Places that could include buildings leased out by the city of Ridgecrest. In the meantime, officials say they are working diligently to get core operations up to speed as soon as possible, with the Pentagon offering support. All this as the priority remains the welfare for those who work here.
There is nothing more important than seeing everybody here today and knowing you're safe, with frazzled nerves, but safe. And we're going to make sure that you feel every bit as safe when you come back to work here in the coming days and coming weeks, that you feel absolutely safe so that we can all get focused on taking care of all our men and women in uniforms.
As for those who work on the base, officials with the U.S. Navy say employees should expect to hear from their respective supervisors when it is safe to return. Reporting in Ridgecrest, Eitan Wallace, 17 News.
There's cities, and there's cities within cities. We have the rare opportunity to look at this secret city that is the Naval Air Weapons Station, China Lake. NOS covers 1.1 million acres, which is larger than Rhode Island. Now join me inside while we go talk to Dan Carreño. Hi, I'm Elise.
Dan Carreño, the Executive Director here at the Naval Air Warfare Center Weapons Division at China Lake.
So, Dan, why do they call it the Secret City?
Well, that's a great question. Well, it actually traces back to the nuclear weapons program, the Manhattan Project, where we did some work for that program back in the early days.
So now is majority of it a secret?
Well, the majority is. There's about 1% that we can talk about.
Well, now are there things that you can show me, though?
Absolutely.
Well, I'm excited to see them.
Let's go.
Let's go. Dan, can you tell me why NOCWD is so important to Ridgecrest, Kern County, and the nation?
Well, from the standpoint of being the area's largest employer, we have a tremendous economic impact on the city of Ridgecrest and the surrounding area. For the nation and the Navy, there are things that we do here that only we can do for national security and the defense of our nation. And in order to do that, we have to attract and retain the best and the brightest scientists and engineers to work on these capabilities. So that partnership with the city and making that happen is key.
NOCWD at China Lake approximately employs over 4,000 civilians. Can you tell me how you ended up here in the Secret City?
Sure. Well, I've always been fascinated by airplanes, fighter jets, weapons, things that go boom, rockets and blowing stuff up. And as an aerospace engineer, I was looking for a place where I could apply that knowledge. And this organization had an ad, a job ad, and it had a picture of an F-18 like this with a weapon. And I saw the picture, I said, that's where I want to work. And so it got me here, and it's the hands-on work that I've been able to do, participate in all this, and be a part of our Navy and our fleet capability that's really kept me here.
What was some of that hands-on work that you were able to do?
Well, there was integration of weapons, there was rocket motor development. I got to work on larger weapon programs and flight tests. I got to fly in F-18s. And so there were some of the experiences that I had that just really kept me motivated to stay here and continue my career.
Were you able to work in the lab, like right when you got here?
Absolutely. Hands-on right in the labs, and we were working in more propulsion labs, but we have people that are doing that now and get to apply that hands-on expertise, and just really excited about the work that they're doing.
Well, can you show me some of those great minds in the lab?
Absolutely. Let's head over to the chemistry lab and we'll meet some.
Let's go.
So one of our missions is to perform cutting-edge research. I know a lot about what they do, but I'm going to introduce you to one of our experts. I'd like to introduce you to one of our brilliant chemists, Dr. Patrick Fettig.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. All right, I'll leave you guys to it. Thank you.
Patrick, what are some of the things you guys do here? Is it all top secret?
We can tell you some of the things. So one of the main projects we've been working on recently is trying to speed up chemical reactions. So we are always looking for new explosive molecules that we can then go and turn into propellants and then put into weapon systems. Traditionally, your chemist is probably doing chemistry in a small round bottom flask, and they can maybe do 1 to 10 reactions a day. we've now moved on to doing chemical reactions and 384 weld plates that we can then stamp down and get up to 6,144 reactions an hour. So you can imagine how many more molecules we can go and discover in such a short period of time compared to traditional methods.
So now it's faster, whereas in the past it was slower.
Much faster.
And now, is this the machine you guys only work with, or do you guys work with more?
Oh no, this is just one of many. Actually, as part of our new facility, we have about 15 more robots coming together that will actually go from just making and discovering new molecules, but actually now scaling them up and then putting them into those propellant formulations so that we could use them in future systems.
So you have more and faster science.
Exactly.
Now, is that all going to stay here, or are you guys going to expand more, since this is quite of a small area?
Yeah, we are actually very lucky. We're moving to a brand new facility in about a week, and we are expanding quite heavily.
So all that's going to fit here in this tiny area? Or?
Currently, but we're about to upgrade and move into our new facility.
Is there a way you can show me any of it?
Sure, let's go see it.
The building looks great. Now, how do you find your recruitments?
So there's 4 major ways that we go and hire. First is through our internship program called NREP, so we can hire undergraduate and graduate students to come out for the summer and do research with us. The second way is the DoD SMART Fellowship Program, where the DoD will actually pay for your tuition and some housing stipend, and then you come out and work for us after you complete your degree. The third is the postdoc program, so after you complete your PhD, you come out for 1 to 3 years and do research with us. Or fourth, just send us your resume.
Well, it sounds exciting, and I'm sure this building will be full of people, and I'm excited for your guys' future.
Thank you.
In 2023, NOC-WD had a payroll of $636 million in Kern County alone. Hi, my name's Elise.
Hi, Elise. How are you doing? My name is Captain Jeremy Bond. I'm the commanding officer of China Lake.
So I hear you are the mayor of this secret city?
That's right. This amazing, wonderful place.
And what does the mayor entail?
Well, first of all, it's a massive place. 1.1 million acres, which is basically the state larger than Rhode Island, smaller than Delaware, but it's an incredible place in Southern California that we do incredible things to defend the nation. But the mayor, just like everything else, requires all the things that a mayor does. We have childcare, we have a bowling alley, we have a gym, and we have a lot of people here that are dedicated to defending our nation.
I didn't realize that much was here. It doesn't look like it.
Yeah, it's the desert's an incredible place. I grew up in the desert, and it doesn't seem like there's much, but here, behind those gates, so much ready for the nation.
And can you show me more of the secret city?
Absolutely. Let me show you why China Lake is so important.
So why is this so important to the nation?
Well, it shows that the technological advances that we need to defend our warfighters and defend the nation have been developed here since 1943. So this system that's over here on my left is a perfect example. During World War II, we learned that the Germans had some incredible rocket systems that they were using to attack Britain over across the Channel. So the scientists here, when Secretary Knox developed this place in 1943, they brought the greatest minds in weapons development here into the middle of the desert to develop systems like this, which took that German system and then put a guidance system. Yes, this is old. It's filled with vacuum tubes, but this was cutting edge in 1943, 1944. This BAT system really considered one of the first unmanned aerial vehicles of its time.
So what exactly did it do?
So as it flew, normal rocket system would fly unguided. It would just fly to a spot as it was launched. But this one, as you can see, the vacuum tubes, the guidance system, and a radar system, a rudimentary radar system on the front, allowed this to go and actually search for enemy ships in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Incredible technology for its time, and just a harbinger of all the technology that's around us, and that behind closed doors in secrecy we are doing to help defend the nation against new threats that are on the horizon.
Wow. Well, I'm excited to see more of this museum.
We've got a 1.1 million acres to show you, and plenty in the museum. Let's go see some more.
You told me how important China Lake is to the nation. Now, can you tell me how important it is to our economic development?
Absolutely. We're critical to Kern County. We hire over 500 people a year. We have about 6,000 people on staff here on China Lake. And that we have incredible Americans that work here, everywhere from a lifeguard to a triple PhD physicist to the incredible work that our guards and security officers and firefighters, because we have those here on the installation, all the way to the military test pilots that test these incredible weapon systems we see around us. It's incredibly important, the number of people that we hire and work here on the installation for Kern County. In fact, the systems that we develop here, the technology that is created here on China Lake, is deemed so important by the nation that they invested $4 billion back onto the installation to ensure this base is back whole after the devastating earthquakes of 2019. So yes, we're important to the nation, but that amount of money coming into Kern County and those amount of jobs, it's incredibly important what we do for Kern County, not just how we defend our nation.
Well, Captain, thank you for showing me around, and it's been a fun and exciting day.
It's been absolutely my pleasure. This is a wonderful place filled with incredible people that do incredible things for our nation. But it's a huge base, and I've got to go do that mayor stuff, so I've got to go. I hope you enjoy the rest of your China Lake tour.
Well, I'm going to stick around and see a little bit more of the museum.
Lots to see. Enjoy it.
Thanks. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it. There's your small glimpse of the secret city. See you next time on Where Business is Boundless.
1943, the Navy established China Lake as a model of what a military-civilian workforce can accomplish together. And today, we continue that tradition of innovation, professionalism, and one-of-a-kind expertise in order to deliver solutions to the warfighter.
The best part of working here is that you are part of something bigger than yourself, something significant. Whether it's 1943, 2003, or 2053, the mission has and always will come first.
China Lake Way was a methodology of doing work. It was a way of achieving a goal. You can't beat the track record China Lake had for new developments and weapons. It makes you feel good, and I could have probably never felt that way working anywhere else.
China Lake is unique because of the outstanding team of military and civilian professionals that develop and deliver warfighting capabilities that defend our freedom.
Young workers coming in and jumping in and making a difference, and we see it every day.
China Lake, I came for a year and stayed for a lifetime, and I wouldn't change a thing.
The most important thing about China Lake is innovation, but managers who support innovation over the years.
I love China Lake because innovation happens every day.
Being stationed here at NOS China Lake at the EOD detachment, there's always something new to learn, always something new to do, and the job doesn't get boring.
As a China Lake flight test engineer, I get the opportunity and the ability to go out and serve the fleet in ways that aren't comparable at any other facility for the United States Navy.
I love working at NOC WD in China Lake because I get to do some of the most exciting flying I've gotten to do in my career. It's a really special place.
Basically, what I do at China Lake is I get to keep pilots in the sky and protect our pilots, and it's very fulfilling and I love it.
When I came out here, man, it was like all the things that they do out here, phenomenal. I'm so excited for my career moving forward.
The military-civilian team here at China Lake has always worked together to provide cutting-edge capabilities to the warfighter when and where they need them. While the people and the technology have changed, our mission remains the same. After 75 years, China Lake continues its proud heritage of arming the fleet with the most dedicated, innovative people you will find anywhere.
All right, so I'm just going to end it right there. So, wow, long video, but at the same time, a lot of good information about just the China Lake aspect to the whole Belongos network of Edwin Wilson and Frank Turple. And just as a disclaimer, this is not to discredit the China Lake facility itself and all the employees of past or present who worked hard, were abiding by the law. I'm just making this video just to say that a few employees were caught up in the situation I'm talking about. So I'm not trying to discredit the military or the China Lake facility or the Navy or anything like that. But this is just kind of just fascinating history that I'm doing for myself, for my own research purposes. So thank you, and another video coming soon. All right, peace.